Hi everyone, I'm Mark Cheverton, author of the Game Night 999 series of Minecraft novels. And today I wanted to talk with you about a really important part of your story, and that's called the hook. And the hook is the first the first chapter in your story that its purpose is to get the reader excited about what you're writing and excited about the story and interested in what's going to happen. And they're going to because the first chapter is so good, they're going to go to chapter 2. And I can't tell you how many books I've read where chapter 1 really stank and it wasn't interesting at all, and I didn't go to chapter 2. I put the book away because I didn't want to waste my time on a book that didn't interest me. And so it's really important when you have your story and you're writing that first chapter, it has to do a certain number of things to get the reader really excited about it. So, let me give you an example of one of my favorite hooks, and that is in Harry Potter. In the first chapter, you see that Harry Potter lives under the stairs, right? And he lives with this terrible family that treats him really, really bad. And it makes you wonder, why are these people doing that? This is interesting because here's a kid who's got to live under the stairs, and he's got this nice little thing all set up down underneath there, but it's a pretty horrible place to live. And that automatically draws you into the story, and you want to find out, why is this kid living under the stairs? What's the circumstances here? And so that's a really great hook, and that's a really great way to start the story. In the Lego movie, my favorite movie, as many of you know, the hook is you see Emmett going to work, and he's doing everything everybody else does, and you see this really interesting, really creative Lego world. And everybody's building stuff, and everybody's doing things. But then, at the end of that first scene, you see Wildstyle appear, and she's looking around for something, and Emmett kind of follows her, and then Emmett falls, and he gets the cap to the craggle. He gets the relic stuck to his back. And you're thinking, wow, what happened there? What's going to happen with this? And that's really exciting. And that's a great way to start that movie, because right away you're drawn in and you don't want to walk out of the movie. You want to see what's going to happen next. And so that's a really fantastic thing. But when you're doing your hook, a lot of authors will put a lot of emphasis on the first sentence. And I try to do the same. I didn't really do it as much in my earlier Minecraft novels, but now I spend a lot of time on it. And that first sentence, it kind of sets the tone for the whole story and for your hook. And if the first sentence is kind of weak, it kind of might convince the reader that maybe this whole story is going to be weak. And so I always spend a lot of time crafting that first sentence. Now, I'll warn you, I used to spend time, that was the first thing I really worked on, was that first sentence, and I found I didn't get the first chapter written. So I'll kind of throw something down on the page, and I'll write the first chapter, and then I'll go back and focus on how can I make that first sentence really, really, really interesting. Like one book that I was going to write that was called Blue Algae, I think. I never wrote it. But the first sentence said, if I can remember from memory, it's a peculiar thing to witness your own death before it happens. That's something like that. And it's just an interesting first sentence that makes the reader go, huh, that's kind of weird. Let me read you a couple of first sentences I have here. So, in the book I'm working on right now, let me put it up here. Let's see if I can put it right there. Boop. Okay, it says, Samantha is running for her life again. And again, well, that's interesting. And why is she running for her life? That's interesting too. And so it kind of poses a question in those first few words. Here's the one from The Giant's Giant, which is my 25th book that hopefully comes out in, 6-8 months or so. And, let me put them over here. Boop, there we go. Brianna frowned. It was the kind of frown that creased her face with deep slices of frustration and rage and sorrow, the unfairness of the situation enveloping her soul. So, unfair situations, yeah, we've all been there, right? We all know what that means, and it looks like Brianna, whoever that is really upset and really sad and really frustrated. And I wonder what it is she's really sad and frustrated about. That's my first thought when I read that sentence. And that's the goal of your first sentence, is get the reader engaged in thinking, well, what's going on here? Why is she really sad and frustrated and angry? And right away, you've drawn the reader into the story. And they've started to suspend any disbelief they have, and they're treating your story as it's a real thing, and I want to see what happens to this character. Here's the one from my last Minecraft novel, Wither Invasion, which, when I've recorded this, it hasn't come out yet, so you get a little sneak peek. It says, the dark Wither's 6 eyes glared down at the monsters and villagers with vicious contempt, their willingness to live in peace offending every inch of his black skeletal body. So how do you think about the Wither there? He's actually the antagonist, right? He's a pretty bad dude, right? And he seems like he's pretty mean and pretty nasty. And why are the monsters and villagers living together? That's interesting. What's going on there? And it sounds like the Wither's going to do something because he's kind of angry about them living together all peacefully and stuff. And so something bad's going to happen next. And that's the goal of that first sentence, is to let you get engaged and think about what's going on here. And this first sentence, the really important thing is the first sentence makes a promise to the reader. It tells the reader, what's this book going to be about? In the Wither Invasion, it's going to be about withers invading, obviously. But this Wither is a really bad dude, and he is going to cause some havoc. And like for Samantha Reese, in the first example of that book is going to be called The Magic's Curse, which I'm working on right now. You know, Samantha is running for her life again. Well, that's a pretty consistent theme all throughout the story. People are always chasing her. Let's see. So I have a number of examples. I'm not going to put them on the screen here because I can't boop that many, but I'm going to read them to you here, because these are some really great examples of really fantastic first sentences. So the first one, in a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit, from The Hobbit. And that's cool, because what's a hobbit and they're living in the ground? Well, that's kind of weird. Here's another one from the book called Delirium. It has been 64 years since the president and the consortium identified love as a disease, and 43 years since scientists perfected a cure. Whoa, that's kind of spooky. That's kind of neat. Here's one from Twilight. I've never given much thought to how I would die, though I'd have reason enough in the last few months. But even if I had, I would not have imagined it like this. Well, that's kind of like mine there, right? Of thinking about or seeing your death before it happens. That's really cool. Here's one from one of my favorite books, Ender's Game. Ender's Game, if you haven't read Ender's Game, you totally should. It's a fantastic book. It's a great series of science fiction novels from Orson Scott Card. It says, I've watched through his eyes, I've listened through his eyes, and I tell you, he's the one. Well, that gives me chills. Because whose eye? I've watched through his eyes. So there's somebody watching through somebody else's eyes. Well, that's really weird. And listening through their ears, and he's the one. So this person he is talking about must be somebody significant. And so that's really cool. Okay, from Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. Look, I didn't want to be a half-blood. And so we know there's a protagonist, I, and he didn't want to be a half-blood. What's a half-blood? So that really poses that question about, demigods in that story and what the half-bloods are. That's really cool. Hey, this is from Dead Girls Don't Write Letters. That's a really cool title. Things have been getting a little better until I got a letter from my dead sister. That is super spooky, right? And so things were getting better, so things were bad, and now they're getting better. So there's some backstory there. But then she got a letter from her dead sister. Wow, that's awesome. Okay, and the last example is from The Book Thief. Here is a small fact. You are going to die. Well, that kind of sets the tone for that, right? That's really a fantastic one. Okay, so those are just some first sentences. It's really hard to nail a good first sentence. In all of my stories, I always work on that first sentence. I never get it to the point where I really think it's great. But, you get it as well as you can. A good author never thinks their story is right. It's always as good as they can make it, and then they got to turn it in to the editor and do the next one. But there's always places where you know it needs to be fixed, but you don't know how to fix it. So those are just the first sentences. But the whole hook as a overall, as I mentioned earlier, it's this tool to help get readers engaged into your story. And it needs to do a certain number of things. So I mentioned it needs to get the readers engaged, and you need to get them engaged quickly. And the best way to do that is with action and dialogue. And as I've spoken about before, action and dialogue is what drives the story. And if you don't have action and dialogue, if you just have backstory and description, you're going to put your readers to sleep. And so you got to get to action and dialogue as quickly as you can. In my current story, which is The Magic's Curse, and that opening sentence was Samantha Reese was running for her life again. It's a scene with Samantha running and the King's Guards are chasing her and stuff, and she's alone. And I'm struggling with I got the action, but how do I get the dialogue in there? And I struggle with that, and I don't know how I'm going to do that yet. And I may have to give her a companion there, which I really don't want to do. I could give her a pet to talk to, but I really don't want to have a pet in this one, so I haven't figured out how to do that yet. So I'm still working on it. Okay, the second thing is you need to insert some tension and conflict right away in your hook. You need to let the reader know that there's some things going on and your protagonist is struggling with obstacles and there's things in their way. You don't necessarily show that there's a lot of big things happening. You want to hint at them, so the reader is going to wonder why. There's going to wonder what's going on there. So you want to create that some sort of tension and conflict in the hook as soon as you can. Every scene you should have tension and conflict, because that's the whole purpose of your story, is to throw tension and conflict in front of your protagonist, and then the reader gets to watch them surmount them and get past them. Okay, the third thing is to hint or show that there's some sort of mystery going on. There's something happening and the protagonist has to do something. There's a mystery that they're trying to unravel. You don't really know who's going to solve the mystery. You don't know what the mystery is about, but you want to hint at it to get the reader thinking, what's that about? So that's important. And the last thing, I always try to, in the question, I want to pose a question that the reader is going to feel like they have to answer. Like there's an itch in the back of their brain and they got to figure out what it is. So in the Minecraft novel, The Wither Invasion, the itch is this wither wants to go after the protagonist, who's named Watcher, and he's one of the few wizards left in the Far Lands, and he wants to take some revenge, and he has a plan on how he's going to do it. And the itch is, how is the wither going to get to that world and get to Watcher and destroy him? Because he's got a big giant army behind him. He's got lots of monsters to do some damage, and how is he going to get there? And so that's kind of the question I'm posing in that first chapter, that I'm hoping the reader is thinking, I hope he doesn't destroy Watcher, but how's he going to do that? That's really interesting. And so you really want to think about your hook as something that's creating an itch in the reader's mind, and they got to scratch it. They got to go to the next chapter and find out what's going to happen. So down on the website here, there's down below, there's that first chapter in The Wither Invasion. That's there for you to read, so you can see what I did in that book to create that first scene, to create my hook, to get the readers engaged in that story. And so you can look at that, and you can read it, and maybe you find things you like, and maybe you find things you don't like. Those are great things to discuss, because not anybody's writing is great for everybody, and maybe there's things you would have done differently. And that's great to hear about. So I hope this is helpful with your hook. I encourage you to really work on this, because the hook will make a huge difference in how the reader approaches your story. And a strong hook will make them really, really engaged in it. And so it's a valuable exercise to work on your hooks and work on your first sentences until you can get good at these, because it's a skill you're going to use when you write every story and when you write an essay. You want a good hook at the beginning of your essay for school to engage the reader there. This case, the reader is your teacher. You want to engage them with that, and that's really important. And so you want to look at that. So I hope this is helpful, and I'll see you next time. Bye.